Namaste and good morning to all of you. Let's start the class with Gita Dhyanam. Om Pathaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasena Grathitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritvarshinim Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayane Amutvam Anusandhame Bhagavad Gita Bhavatveshine Namo Astute Vyas Vishal Buddhe Full Arvind Ayat Patra Netar येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञानमया प्रदीपः प्रपन्न पारिजाताये तोत्र वेत्र एकपानये ज्ञान मुद्राये कृष्णाय गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव सुतम देवम कंस चानूर मर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णम वंदे जगत गुरुम भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्राहवती कृपेन वाहने कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोर मकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तने सो तीर्णा खलु पांडवै रन्नदी के वर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलम गीता अर्थ गंधोटकम नाना ख्यानक केसरम हरि कथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षटपदय रह पे पिये मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकम करोति वाचालम पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरिम यत् कृपातमं वंदे परमानंद माधवम यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवे वेदे सांगपद क्रमोपनिषदे गायन्ति यम सामगा ध्यानवस्थे तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुसुर असुरगना देवाय तस्मै नमः. Bhagavad Gita we are studying on in our Sunday classes, and we are towards the end of the third chapter, and title of this chapter is Karam Yog. So today we're going to finish this chapter. Then I will request Urmilji to recite the poetry she has written. So the last few verses of this chapter. Then we'll have some discussion. And after that, a bhajan by Manu. So that's the program for today. So last week, we ended this class with verse number 38. And as you saw in this verse, Lord Krishna is telling us that desires can fall under three headings according to the quality of the attachment or the thickness of the ignorance. Tamsik, Rajsik, and Satvik. For Tamsik desires, he gave the example of a embryo in a womb. For Rajsik, he gave the example of a dust on the mirror. And for a Satvik desire, he gave the example of a smoke on the fire. So in other words, Satvik desires, very easy to remove. Rajsik, it will take little effort. Tamsik, even more effort and longer time. That's why we do have desires. Excuse me. We have desires from the old times also, from the past. But at least now, make sure there are more and more sattvic desires. And ultimately, no desires. Okay? So we got to just be conscious about it. It's not going to happen by itself. We got to do sadhana properly so that desires of ours. And where do the desires reside? Lord Krishna is going to talk about that also. So sometimes we wonder, where are these desires? Which are the enemies? We got to know. We got to, if we are fighting against or removing these desires, our enemy, we got to know where do they reside also. So let's start the class with verse number 39 today. Avritam jnanam etena jnanina nitya verina काम रूपेण कौन्तेय दुष्पुरेण अनलेन च avritam enveloped, covered. Jnanam, wisdom, eten, by this. Jnanina, of the wise. Nitya varina, constant enemy, the everyday enemy. Kam rupen, whose form is desire. Kaunteya, Arjuna. Dushpuren, unappeasable. Unlain, by fire. Cha means and. So Lord Krishna is saying, enveloped, O son of Kunti, is wisdom by this constant enemy of the wise in the form of desire. So only a wise person thinks that desires are my enemies. So enveloped is wisdom by this constant enemy of the wise in the form of desire, which is difficult to be appeased like fire. It's like a fire. We think that we can just quench the fire with the help of oil. No, we can't. So that's how these desires are also. So this particular verse is explaining to us that Gyan, the discrimination, the capacity to distinguish between the real and the unreal, the permanent and the temporary, the true and untrue. Because in order to discriminate between these two, that's how we know that whether we are wise or not, we are Gyani or not. And these desires do not let us see this. Remember in the last verse, I told you there are two pronouns, it and this, ten and idam. So ten and idam, those are the one explained over here. Okay, it is the discrimination. The power to discriminate between the real and unreal. And ten means desires. So desires cover this discrimination. That's how they are wary of a or enemy of a wise. And now in the next verse, as I said earlier, he's going to tell us where are they seated. We got to know where this enemy of ours is, so that we can attack it. We can get rid of it. He says, Indriyani mana buddhi asya adhishthanam uchyate ete vimohyati esha jnanam avritya dehinam. Indriyani, the senses. Man, the mind. Buddhi, the intellect. Asya, it's adhishthanam, it's a dwelling place or a seat. Uchyate is called. Ete, by these, vimohyati, deludes. Esha, this, jnanam, wisdom, avritya, having enveloped, covering it. Dehinam, the embodied. The senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be its seat. Through these, it deludes the embodied by veiling his wisdom. Okay, so now we know exactly where this enemy is seated. Very clearly, very exactly, Lord Krishna is telling us in detail. So the senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be its seats of action. Sense organs, we all know, if they keep on functioning without any restraint in the world of sense objects, that is a very convenient place for the desires to reside. See, that's why there's a so-called tapasya, in a sadhak's life. Eyes should not go where it can create a problem for me, where it can increase more desires. We all know these 5 sense organs of ours. Restrain them. Use them, but use them properly. Do not let them loose. If we let them loose, definitely this enemy will sit on these senses. So the very first place is the sense organs. And when we are not careful with our sense organs, what happens? Then external stimuli reaches the mind. And then that very or that enemy is in the mind now. Mind becomes a breeding center for these desires. Constantly mind keeps on thinking, I want this, I want to have it, I'm not happy without it. Just keeps on churning the mind. But where did it start? Unrestrained senses. So problem is not with the objects. The problem is with the sense organs. Unrestrained sense organs. Then mind becomes the breeding. And then he says the intellect. Working and playing with the memories of the sense enjoyments. Just keeps on thinking about it. I went there. I saw this. I had this. So constantly keep on going through those memory banks. That's like a mental attachment. We keep on entertaining ourselves or feeling sorrow also. Then what happens? This ego gets deluded. We start identifying with our body, with our sense enjoyments. We identify with our mind, and we are thirsting to experience more and more of the emotional satisfaction. According to Lord Krishna, this is all a play or a playground for a foolish man, not a wise man. When we identify with the intellect also, we plan to relive the remembered experiences of the sense enjoyments and mental joys. And when we don't get those joys, then we get frustrated. Or when we see somebody else enjoying more, we feel frustrated. So it's like a very clearly he's giving us a complete picture where who is the enemy of a wise person? Because a bhogi does not think it's my enemy, but a wise person will think it's my enemy. And where it's seated? Right here, in our subtle body. And that's how our intellect becomes clouded. With a clouded intellect, we make the wrong decisions. Because intellect is that part of our personality which decides, then we make the wrong decisions. We become the slave of lust and we'll do anything to appease it. Anything. From Satvikta, we slide down to Rajsikta and to the Tamsikta also. So these senses or the mind or the intellect by themselves, they are not bad. These are the instruments given to us to evolve ourselves. So this is what we forget. But we want to be wise. And how do we do it? Lord Krishna in verse number 41, he says, Tasmat. Tasmat means therefore. Now we know what the problem is. So this is the problem. So this is what we can do. Tasmat tvam indriyani adav niyame bharat rishab papam manam prajahihi enam gyan vigyan nashanam. Tasmat, therefore, Tvam, you. Indriyani, the senses. Adau, in the beginning. Niyame, controlled. Bharat Rishabh, that is for Arjun, the best of the Bharats. Say Bharat dynasty. Pap Manam, the sinful. Prajhi, kill or slay. He means surely, enam this, Gyan Vigyan Nashnam, the destroyer of the knowledge and wisdom. So he says, therefore, O best of the Bharats, controlling first the senses. Kill this a sinful thing, the destroyer of knowledge and wisdom. So what is this now? The desires. He's telling us to control the senses first. Because mind is hard to control, very subtle. But the senses are grosser. Control your senses. That's why Rishi Patanjali also, before the dhyan is control of the mind. What did he say? Before dhyan, what should we do? We should do tap. And tap is the control of the senses. Start from the grosser first. So if you don't have any control over our senses, sitting and thinking we are meditating, no, we are not meditating. We are only meditating on our desires. So desire is a threat to both knowledge and wisdom. That's what he's telling us. Gyan Vigyan Nashnam. Because desire, agitations are a danger not only to our divine experiences, which we may gain here and there during our practice, sometimes during the practice of Hatha Yoga, sometimes during the practice of our bhakti, we do get a glimpse of it. But it is also very dangerous to our intellectual capacities to understand and follow the advice given by a guru. Or whatever we study also, it doesn't let us understand the full import of what we study. So desire is called sinful in its grosser manifestation, papanam. It's a papa. Because it tends to make us live and work, satisfying our lower nature, lower urges. And we even convince ourselves. Very easily we convince ourselves to do even the wrong things. That is the lower nature. That's how, instead of evolving, we slip down. Okay? So we got to keep a very strict discipline when it comes to our senses. So desire is the root of all evil. Curb the desires of the senses. Keep a good eye on it. And now in the next verse, he's telling us how, keeping in mind the higher, getting the direction from the higher, how the lower can be controlled. Okay? In other words, if we think of ourselves as the soul, the Atma, and our life is to help God. We are just instruments of God. It becomes easy. But if we think, no, this life is for myself, I want to please myself, I want to just only go through my own desires over here, then we keep on slipping down. So this is what he's telling us in the next verse. In our own little body over here, he is giving us a beautiful verse where we can just bring our attention towards the higher. Higher means the subtler. He says, Indriyani parani ahu, Indrebhya paramana, Manasatu parabuddhi, ya buddhe partatu sa. Indriyani, the senses. Parane, superior. See, par means higher. Par is lower, par is higher. Ahu, they say. Indriyebhya, the senses. Param, superior. Mana, the mind. Manasa, then the mind. Tu means but. Para, superior. Buddhi, intellect. Ya means who? Buddhe, then the intellect. Parta, greater. Tu means but, sa means he. And who is this he over here? The Atma, the soul, the self. They say that the senses are superior to the body. Okay? So senses, Gyanendriya. So senses are superior to the body. That's why these sense organs, if they stop functioning, see how many sense organs we have? 5. Out of 5, they say if 3 don't work, body cannot function. That's how important these senses are. So senses are superior to the body. Superior to the senses is the mind. Superior to the mind is the intellect. And one who is even superior to the intellect is he, the Atma. So in this verse, we see what we learn from Kathopanishad. The Lord of Death gave this explanation to Nachiketa, the young student. Scheme of self-discovery, it's called. Okay, so sense organs are definitely sacred. They are divine. They are also called devatas. But there is something higher than, subtler than them. That is the mind. So mind should control the senses. But then who should control the mind? There is a boss of mind also. That is the intellect. And then we know there is a boss of intellect also. That is the Atma. So the grosser or the inferior entity should be controlled by the superior entity. And this gradation is given to us over here by Lord Krishna. So it's almost like in a family. The parents should guide and lead the youngsters, not the other way around. Parents with more experience, higher authority, they should make the decisions. So in our body over here also, so Atma is eternal. Body was born only few decades ago. Mind and the intellect was born sure few lives ago. But when it comes to the Atma, the he, the soul, is a part of God. It was always there. So we should remember that. Always keep it in mind. I am part of God. That's why all our actions, whether they're at the physical level or mental level or the verbal level, we should see, am I pleasing God by doing this, by saying it? God in me, God everywhere, or not? Then we become a Karam Yogi. Okay? And this example we see right in the front page of our Bhagavad Gita too. See? Bhagavad Gita. This picture itself tells us what he is telling us in this. First of all, the horses, they are white in color. That means they are pure. They are well controlled. purer will be easier to control, just like we saw that sattvikta, sattvic desire, very easy to get rid of, that smoke on the fire. So white horses, you'll never see the black horses on Bhagavad Gita. And then the rein, that rope which is holding the horse, and it's being held by the charioteer, that is the mind. So well-tamed senses are being controlled by that strong rein. But then who's holding that rein? The charioteer, that is the intellect. And this chariot over here is the body. So body, the senses, the mind, and the intellect. If the superior is controlling the lower or the inferior, or if the subtler is controlling the grosser, then the owner in the back who's sitting can enjoy the ride. Okay, so owner is the Atma. Chariot is this body. Senses are the horses. Mind is the rein, and the intellect is the driver. So higher, the lower should listen to the higher. The wiser should give the directions and the guidance to the lower. This is what Lord Krishna is telling us. Let's look at the last verse of this beautiful chapter. There's so much wisdom in this chapter. So much we can bring into our daily life, the messages we have learned from these 43 verses. And that is what we're going to talk about today. What have you learned? So let's look at the last verse. Evam buddhe param buddhva samastabhe atmanam atmana jehi shatrum mahabaho kam rupam durasatam. Evam means thus, buddhe, then the intellect. Param, superior, buddhva, having known. Samastabhe, restraining, controlling. Atmanam, the self. Atmana, by the self. Jahi, slay. Shatrum, the enemy. Mahabaho, Arjuna. Kam rupam, of the form of desire. See, again and again he's telling us what is the form of our enemy. This is just to make sure that we understand it. We don't stay deluded. Durasadam, hard to conquer. So that means he does understand it is hard to conquer because we haven't learned it yet. Thus, knowing him who is superior to intellect and restraining the self by the self. What is this self? One self means the ego. The other self is the soul. So this ego of ours, identification with the lower, should be controlled by the higher self. He says, slay, O mighty armed, the enemy in the form of desire. And then he says, no doubt, hard indeed to conquer. Hard, but not impossible. Because if it was impossible, this great Guru will not tell us to do this. He will say, no, it's not even possible. I'll just put my hand on your head and bless you. No, he says, you got to do it. Only you can do it. Self by the self. So this is a concluding verse. And he's emphasizing that we should slay this enemy called lust through the knowledge of the self. Knowledge has that much power. Knowledge. That's why knowledge is always considered the light. Even when we do the arti, in the plate of arti, there is a lamp. Lamp represents the knowledge. And the diya in that bati, in that diya always goes upward. So knowledge takes us upward. That signifies the goal. That signifies the God. So knowledge is that's why we study. So that this knowledge, it seeps into us and we ultimately practice it. So it's a very special advice Lord Krishna is giving to Arjuna because he demanded this. He wanted to know it. So over here, Lord Krishna is saying, through knowledge alone is ignorance ended. There's no other way. Lived experience, we have to practice it. We have to bring it in our life. That's what it really means when he says self alone can end our ignorance about the self. We have forgotten who we are. We think we are the body. We think what we have attained in this material world, what we have accumulated. We think that's what we are. He says, no. So, sure, there is a process of meditation. Every day when we do a few minutes of meditation also, it helps us. When we study something like this, that helps us. When we do seva, that helps us. When we are in the company of the holy people, that helps us. It's a multifaceted process. Not just one thing alone, but ultimately, this is what we have to, that's where we are going. So soul is a part of God. It is divine in nature. And it's seeking the divine bliss. And it can attain that divine bliss only from the divine subject, not from the material objects. Remember that. This whole world is a material object. Soul is divine. This divine is seeking a divine bliss. So these worldly desires, we got to reduce them also. We got to change the color of it also. Color means the tamasic is black, rajasic is red, and sattvic is white. We got to change the color. And then after that, sure, we will move towards this light. I will end this class, this chapter with this verse from Katha Upanishad, which says exactly the same thing. And this is spoken by Yamaraj, Lord of Death. He says, Atmanam rathinam vidhi, shariram ratham evatu, buddhim tu sarthim vidhi, mana pragrahev meja. Indriyani hayanahu, vishyam teshu gocharan, atam indriye manoyuktam, bhogte ahu manishina. Whatever Lord Krishna said in these last few verses, he said, there is a chariot, Rath, which has 5 horses pulling. And these horses have the reins in their mouths, which are in the hands of a charioteer. And the passenger is sitting in the back of the chariot. He says, ideally, the passenger should instruct the charioteer, who should then control the reins and guide the horses in the proper direction. And that's how our life should be. It's a Karam Yog chapter. So he is teaching us how to be a Karam Yogi. With the help of several examples, and especially this very powerful example, he's giving it to us, if we can keep in mind. So let me do the Shanti part, and then I will ask Urmilji to recite the poetry from her book. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Yo. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yes,
Hello.
you're okay. We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, we finished at 3:20, actually 3:19, where it tells us to perform the prescribed duties selflessly and with no attachment to the outcome. Now, Lord Krishna advised Arjun not to renounce his duties but perform them selflessly for various reasons. And he tries to support his point of view with, supports his point of view by giving why we should perform them selflessly. History tells us that through selfless service, King Janak and the wise men attained perfection. Oh, Arjun, it would be best to do selfless work and set an example for the good of every nation. Obligatory duties that the noble souls perform for the good of all inspires other men also to do the same. Whatever moral, ethical, and spiritual norms the great men set, humanity also tries to pursue. Lord Krishna presented his example to Arjun. There is no duty for me to perform in all these three worlds, and I gain nothing from these services. O Partha, nevertheless, I engage in all kinds of actions selflessly for the benefit of the masses. If I am careless in doing my prescribed duties, I would be guilty of misleading humanity. Then, O son of Pritha, then they too will work rashly, assuming that's the way it should be. If I were to give up being proactive in cosmic creation, the universe would surely fall apart. Then I would be liable for the chaos and the ruin, and the human race will lose peace and heart. The ignorant versus the wise knowers of truth. Now he tries to compare the characteristics of the ignorant versus the ones with wisdom. The ignorant, even though they do their duties, calculate rewards by doing quick math, whereas a man of perfection works without attachment and leads people on the right path. But note, no wise man should upset the minds of the ignorant to seek rewards for sacrifice. The wise should do actions selflessly and lovingly. Then such an example will suffice. The forces of three modes of material nature, Prakriti, directs all the activities that occur. But the ignorant, deluded by egoism, misidentifies with the body and thinks, I am the doer. The wise who can tell apart the self and functions of the three modes of nature, the gunas, they stay unattached, attributing the activities of the senses, mind, and sense object to the gunas. Those deluded by the actions of the body, senses, and the mind cling to them for fulfillment. The wise who are well versed in the truth should not confuse and unsettle the ignorant. Lord Krishna goes on to encourage Arjuna to fight the righteous war. O Arjuna, dedicate and offer all your actions to me. Always meditate on me as the supreme sight. Renounce all desires, selfishness, egoism, and hopes. Overcome mental fever and fight. Those who have faith, Shraddha, in Vedic teachings without questioning them respect dharma. They grasp the scriptures, abide by them in daily life, and are free from the bondage of karma. But those who denounce my divine teachings, disregard the Vedas and my suggested path, they are ignorant, lacking the sense of discrimination, so they reap ruinous aftermath. Importance of confronting feelings of attachment and aversion. Step by step, he tells us to deal very strongly with all these reasons for attachment. All human beings, including the learned, act as per their nature, influenced by past impressions. Forcing them to obey the scripture is counterproductive. What will they gain from repression? Though feelings of attachment and aversion to sense objects are natural, cut off their powers. Let none come under the sway of attachment and aversion, as these two are a man's avengers. It is far better to do one's prescribed duty, swadharma, even if it is judged inferior or faulty. Following another's path, paradharam, has the danger of disturbing your mind and psyche. Arjun wants Lord Krishna to give a more explicit explanation of the evil forces that overpower a person to commit sins. Question number 3. He asks, this is the question number 3 of the 16 questions. Oh, Varshniya, what is that mysterious force that influences and urges a man to commit sin? Even after a man's effort to refrain from selfish deeds, how do evil forces prevail and win? Obstacles on the path of Karam Yoga. And Lord Krishna replies, the answer is easy, lust and anger. Lord Krishna replied that the first evil is lust, born out of the mode of passion and desires. The resulting evil force is the intense anger arising from that, not procuring what one aspires. Just as smoke envelops fire, dust covers the mirror, and the womb covers the embryo, likewise, one's wisdom and divinity gets eclipsed by the desires and anger combo. O Arjun, the eternal enemy of the human being is lust, which is an insatiable desire. This never-ending desire obscures the wisdom even of the wise, as they burn like voracious fire. The sense organs, the wavering mind, and the misled intellect are the breeders of desires. Then they veil one's wisdom, fools the embodied soul, and sound judgment goes bust. Hence, to stamp out that inner enemy, navigate all the senses into strict discipline. O Arjun, arrest these sinful rivals. These lower urges are terrible, that slay knowledge and wisdom. The 5 senses are superior to the gross body, and the higher senses is the logical mind. Higher than the senses is the logical mind. Above the mind is the sharp intellect, and atop that is the divine soul, the Atma, one of kind. Knowing that the soul is above the intellect, O Arjun, control the self with the self, which is the Atma. Therefore, slay this enemy lust. Slay this with the power of the soul. Stamp out lust, which is Kama. And thus ends chapter 3, Path of Selfless Service. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Urmil. Thank you.